All right, my name is Jeff. I'm here with the Embroidery Nerd, and we are in Pulse DG16, and we are at the composer level. If you caught our last video talking about the file menus and that kind of stuff, now we're going to be going down around these buttons here. We're going to go over the buttons. We're going to talk about the flyout menus, and maybe if we still have some time, I'll go into setting up kind of your options that you may want to use. So the first button up here is going to be our new file button. When we hit that, it's going to create a new design, and it's going to stack them. So we can have more than one design and our start page open at one time. That can be handy if you just need to open up one for a little bit, or if you need to copy them, you can copy and paste between the two files, which is really nice. So if you have something in one file that you want to put in the other, you can go ahead and do that by utilizing these tabs open here. Next up, we have our open. So this is if we need to open a design. I don't have any designs in this folder. I've got them nested somewhere else. But if we needed to open a design, it would be here. We'd go ahead and hit the file name, open, and it'll open that file up for us. And then we can go ahead and edit it from there. Right here, we have our merge design. So if we have a design open and we go into the merge design, we can add another design, and it'll open that same design in the same window. And that's going to allow us to basically, if we're like, let's say we have a DST font or some type of thing that we need to bring in one letter at a time. This is where we would do that. We would bring them in by merging the documents together. After that, we have our save icon. Now, if you don't know, I might date myself a little bit here, but this is a floppy disk. And some embroidery machines still use them, some of the older ones at least. So this is our save icon. You want to make sure that you're saving your files often, because if the software crashes, your computer shuts down, something blows up on the internet, you know, if you operate something wrong enough, any machine is a smoke machine, right? So you want to make sure that you're saving your files and you're saving them often as you're working through them. And you can do that by going here, or you can see if you hover over any of the menus, it'll actually blow up a little shortcut there, and it'll tell us the save is Control S. So if we're working through a document and we want to do a quick save, instead of going up here and hitting the save icon, we can hit Control S. And then we have output to disk. Now this, I'm just going to go through here. This is going to output our design to a USB drive. So if we go this, we can say, we can select the location of our design, which in the window that we're opening, this would be our window. We have our hard drive or CD-ROM, so if we didn't have the design open, we could get that, and we could go, you know, previous uses from there. But generally, you would just do your window. You'd go next, and then it's going to ask you the type of file that you're going to export. So Tajima, DSK, Toyota DSK, Melco, Happy, Brothers, ZSK, that would all be there. And then you would hit finish, and it'll go in here, and you can type the type of file that you want to export and do that. And we'll go through all this a little bit more in depth later. Right now, we're just going to talk about our icons. So real quick, I'm going to do something here. And I'm just going to put a text up, and it's going to be a little bit crooked, but that's fine, because I want to illustrate what these buttons here do. So right here we have our cut. So if we were going to cut it out of the document, there we go. I'm going to hit Control Z to undo. That's the undo case. We can copy it, and then we can paste it. So if I cut it again, I can hit the paste icon, and it'll paste it in. And if I wanted to have this in Design 2 from Design 1, I can copy it here and hit the copy button, and then I can paste here. And now I have it in both Design 1 and Design 2. And that's how you can copy and paste between files, but that's the icons there. Next, we have the print. So it's print the active document. Well, when we talk about printing, it's not actually going to print the document itself. It's going to print the run sheet. So let's just go ahead and we'll throw this on the desktop, and we'll call this hello, and we hit save, right? And now if we go to the desktop here, let me minimize this, and I've got it right there. I'll double click on it, and now you can see we have our run sheet, which gives us, you know, my company name. We have our image of our text. We have the run sheet, the color used, the number of trims, all that information. So that's how you end up getting your run sheet. So when you go to print, it's not actually going to print the document that you're looking for. It's going to print the run sheet. So if you wanted to export this as an image, that's a different process. After that, we can go to our print preview, which is basically just going to do the exact same thing. It's going to pop this up here. It's going to show us this. And the cost We will talk about quoting embroidery later. I would definitely charge more than $1.32 for this, just because of the time it's going to take to. We'll talk about how to calculate the cost later when we go over the quotation estimate, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So that is how we get that. I'm just going to go ahead and close that now, and you can see it brought me back to design 1. I had to hit the close there. After that, we have our print setup. So this is where we can change our paper size. We can, select the printer that we want to use. We can actually print it to a physical printer. I print to a PDF, but that's where we're going to be doing this action at. Here we have our undo. So if we make a change, we can undo it and we can redo it, and we can also repeat the last action. That's not going to happen right now, but that's where that's going to be. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about what's called a flyout menu. We have flyout menus, and I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to zoom in here, and you can see how they have this little mark right here in the bottom right hand corner. This indicates that there's a flyout, that if you hold it, you can see that I now have more options pop out here. So there's more things that those buttons can do underneath. And let me get rid of this magnifying glass. But these are our flyout menus. So the first one here is going to be our text, okay? This is if we're going to do a text like you just saw me do there. We can do it stepped, arced, we can do it in a circle, we can do a monogram, line angle, vertical. That's where all of these are nested under here, okay? We have our Corel Fusion. So if you have an active license of Corel and it's the correct version, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be able to tell you the correct version right now, but you can actually open up Corel inside of Pulse. As you can see down here is our Corel options. So if we needed to open, like import a PDF or something to work off of, we could do that here in Draw Fusion. But that is the flyout there is just Corel Draw Fusion. Next, we have our ruler. So this is our measure tool. Now, what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to measure objects. Here I'm measuring the width of the satin stitch, so I can see that it's 5 millimeters, roughly 5 to 6 millimeters. Now, when we're measuring stuff for our, when we're getting ready to digitize, it's important for us to measure so that we know the size of the object that we're doing. It also helps to know the width if we're trying to make sure that it fits in a specific place. That's where we're going to find all of that information is in the measure tool, and it will allow us to just measure an object, determine what stitch type we want to apply to it, and move on from there. Next up, we have our select. So we have our select here, and then we have our guideline select. So if you actually put in guidelines, and let me move that down, and it stopped right there. So if we do our guideline select, we can actually move our guidelines. Let me get back here. Guideline select. So then I can move that guideline up and down if I want to use a guideline to make sure my text is flat, which that text is not flat, or if I want to set that up for some type of compensation. So we can do that there, and I'll just move that up and out of the road for now. After that, we have our edit. So I'm just going to go ahead and select with the select tool, and let me make sure I get the select here. And now I've got the select tool, I've got the text highlighted. We can go in and node edit, and the node edit is going to give us kind of the nodes that we can go in, and we can make the changes that we need to. There's not a lot of changes on this. If we had an object that was already digitized, we could go in there and make some changes on it. Some of the things that we should be able to do here with our node edit is we can transform. Nope, we're not going down that menu yet. But we should be able to adjust, some of the kerning settings and that kind of stuff. So that's going to be the vertex select. So we can select the vertices. Sorry, not node edit. And then we can edit the envelope. So if we have the bounding box on the outside here, we can make changes to that as well by editing the envelope. Okay. After that, we can copy partial path, average anchor horizontally. We can average anchor vertically, or we can lasso anchor select. And so we're not going to be able to do that with this text right here, but it is something that we have menu options for. Okay. Next up is going to be our stitch select. So this is actually if I want to select a very specific stitch, I can lasso and I can actually erase them. So let's go in here. You can see now that I've selected a stitch, it moves that way. Okay, and that's the stitch that I've selected. So I can pull it. If I need to move a stitch just one or two here or there, I can do that. I can hit the delete key, and I just deleted that stitch, and now we have that one there. If I go there, I can actually go into the stitch eraser tool, and then the ones that I select, it's going to erase. So we can make some modifications on the stitch level here based off of what we need. And we'll just get some more of the stitches here and move on from there. So that's where we can do that. Next up, we have our angle lines. So our angle lines are going to tell us the direction that the stitch angles are going. And let me check here. So you can see I selected this object here. I've got my angle lines right there, the positive and negative. If I move that and it regenerates the stitches, as you can see, it changed the angle. So if I needed to adjust some of the angles of the stitches, I'm able to do that there. To get the stitches to regenerate, I can hit the G key. I can make changes here and just moving that away a little bit because it actually rolled up on the object next to it. So I needed to just bring it over just a little bit there. So that's where we can change the angle of our stitches. So if we have something that's really kind of crazy here and we don't like it and we need to adjust it just a little bit, we can, and regenerate the stitches from there. Okay. Then we have our virtual slice. So our virtual slice is interesting. If I move this here in this single object, what it's going to do is it's going to cut that object right there. And now it treats it like those two would be virtually two different objects. They're actually the same object, but as you can see, the knife there changed that. And if we go back into the vertex or the angle lines, you can see that we need to move that over. And we can fix the angle lines there. Going into that, that's useful like if this is all one object right here and we want to put a virtual slice right there so that the stitch angles can go flat like this. So that is the tool that we would use for that. And as you can see, the last tool that I use is the tool that stays highlighted at the time. So just be aware of that if you're not seeing the icon that you need, it could just be hidden underneath something else and you need to go to the flyout menu. All right. Next up, we have our insert trim at ends. So this is if we want the thread to trim. At the end, we can add that command here by clicking that button, and we can also add an end lock as well. So we can do our lock stitches by clicking that button as well. Insert trim. They're kind of hidden a little bit, but we'll talk about how we can access those a little bit easier later. Okay. And finally, we have output to machine. So if we have our machine set up on the network with the embroidery machines and the print spooler, we're able to send the design over the network to the machine from there. All right. So that kind of goes over our buttons here. Next up, we can go over the top bar here and what all of this stuff means and goes through, because you'll notice that we have some more information up here. So let's go ahead. While I've got this object here, we can look at it. We have our view, which again did not change. Manage is still the same. Tools is pretty close. We now have open the properties dialog, which is going to be the properties that are over here, just a little bit more in depth and things that we can change here. So it's handy to have and something that you're going to need to use at a later time so that we can make sure that we create good embroidery. Okay. We have the librarian, which is the same. Processing, again, the same. Generation. So this is your stitch generation. And sometimes when you make a change, I have it set in my settings so that it'll automatically generate the stitches. But sometimes if it's not generating the stitches, you make a change and it doesn't update on screen right away, you need to go up here to generate selection or generate all, and it'll regenerate the stitches on how they're plotted. You can also do this with the G key. The G key will generate your selection, or Shift G to regenerate all of the stitches. Next up, we have our segment. Okay, so we have our set design start and end. That's if we want our design, if we want it to start bottom center versus center center. This is where the design is going to line up on our machine. For general, I use center center. When I do hats, I do bottom center. So we'll go more into that later, but that is where that is located at in the segment. You can also set your entry and exit points. And that will depend on your level of pulse, I do believe, and the objects that you're dealing with. So that may not work at this time for us. But next we have insert. So if we're going to insert before or after a specific object, if we had multiple objects here, I could select an object and I can say, hey, I want to put my new object in before or in after. Our resequence tools, these are really important. And I'm going to come over here to our sequence view, and I'm going to pin that thing out so that we can see it. Okay. So our resequence is when we get multiple objects here, and I'm just going to copy and paste this. So now we have 2 of them, and we'll change the needle to needle number 2, right? So now we have more than one object. When we get into the sequencing, and I'll go back to segment, we can move these up and down and change the order that they're going to sew. And so for us, that's what we're going to be doing with our resequence. We can move the selected object to the end of the design. You can see that it changed there. I can move it to the start of a design. I can move it one later. I can move it one earlier. So if we're trying to adjust where things are laying, we can do that. We can also resequence by color, by consecutively, resequence consecutively. There we go. Or resequence by selection. So if the order that we select the things in. We can also do change commands, which our command is begin, needle 1, trim, edit, end, rewind. So that's going to finish the object. And we can change those commands to add different things to them. Generally, I would leave them the same, and that's not where I'm going to edit the commands at when I do an object, but that is there that you can take a look at. All right, so now let's go to auto smart join mode. This is going to join the objects in the best way that it can. Again, we don't have a lot to base that off of because we just have text, so this might be more helpful in higher levels of the software. Now we have the hoop. This is something I don't use, I can be honest with you, but it is something that you can put there. You can add a hoop, something that you're going to be able to see. Now we have our hoop reference, and we can put our design in the hoop. So it's just kind of a visual reference for us to see, okay, this is the hoop that we're using. This is how our design is going to fit in it. And we have to remember that the green line is not our sewing area, it is our hoop size. So our sewing area is going to come in just a little bit because we have the depth of the presser foot that we have to allow for. Next up, we're at hoop, so we can load it, we can remove it, we can hide it, we can rotate it. I'm just going to hide it, and ultimately I'll just remove it because I don't use that. We still have our hoop, our help content, so that we can go through and say, hey, we need help, we need to know something. You know, we've got our search, we've got our favorites. Let me go back here to, you know, we can go into our font help. So it's going to be giving us a little bit more information about our fonts. The composer level of this is a lot more geared towards font. So this is going to be a lot more relevant to what we'll be using. We can do our fills as well, but we also have our content there. So depending if we need our contents, our index, we can look at the different things. You double click on it, and now it's up there, and we can see and read about how we need to do things. So that's where our help contents are going to be. Next up, we have our design properties. So this is going to be our overall height or overall width, our master density, which is going to be the general density that we use on all the objects, kind of like the, I want to say style, but I don't think it's style. The formula that they use when we set that up, and we talked about it in the previous video. I'm not going to go drill down in the menus and find it right now, but we also have our fabric thickness, so the thickness that it's going to adjust based off of the thickness of the item. So if your item's a little bit thicker, it'll add a little bit more pull comp and things like that. It'll change the settings that you're going to use based off the fabric's thickness. So we have our design start position. You know, here we're using around 12 millimeter hoop. It's going to make sure that it puts it in the middle. If I just say there's none, then it's not going to bother with the hoop. Or we can do an actual frame position. So I'm just going to leave that at none. And here we go, our recipe. That's what it was called. So we have our recipe. We can change our recipe here to piqué. We can change our basics to our recipe to basics, which is what we're going to use. But we want to make sure that we are using the correct items there. Okay. And next up, we're going to go into our text. So this is our actual text options. I'll just select one piece of text, so we're just working on that. Up here, you can see it is our font style, the font type. So we have new embroidery fonts. We have true type fonts, so it will auto digitize a true type font. Results may vary based off of the actual font that you pick. Okay. We have our slant, so if we want to make it italicize, we can do that. If I want to add some spacing to it, we can do that as well. This is where we can manipulate some of those values. We have our envelope. It's a square envelope. We can add a curve to it. And so that's where we can edit some of the settings of that. And we'll go more into that a little bit later. We have our justify text here, ABC. We have our base curve type, so we could, make a base curve if we wanted to. We could turn it into a circle. Be handy if you're doing a patch, or we can just go straight line right across there. We have our text position. Is it above the baseline? Is it in the middle of the baseline? So that's the baseline that we drew, or above the baseline. That's going to be where that's going to be determined. And I want to change that spacing back to 0 so I can pull my letters a little bit closer back together. There we go. Now, our connection type is going to be closest point. So if we do it as digitized, it'll put the start and stop points wherever they were when they were digitized. And you can see that we have these trims in here now. If we do it closest point, what it's going to do is it's going to find the closest point between our letters, and it's going to jump across there at the closest point. Or we can do what's called the furthest point. And when we do the furthest point, it's going to move that way over here, the furthest as it can from the different letters. And what that's going to allow us to do is if we actually want to do a long jump stitch that we just want to trim out later, we can set it to the furthest point, and that makes it easier for us to get our scissors in there. For most text, though, you're going to be using the closest point. Okay. And now we've got our trim threshold. So this is if this gap between these two objects is less than this number. So if I change it to 1, that gap is now larger than 1 millimeter. So now it's going to add a trim there. If the gap is 3 millimeters or less, now it's going to put a jump there and it's going to go across. So if you're saying, how can I make this trim on every letter? This is one of the ways there. Or you can set that as digitized, and it'll trim on the letters as it was digitized. Or you can do the furthest, and the furthest is just going to change that threshold for you. Okay. Next, we have our trim type. We can say always trim, never trim, or just trim, so we can set that there. And lock stitches. So we can set our lock stitches around trims. Now, our lock stitches are what's going to keep things from coming unraveled. We need to have an lock stitch at the beginning of every object. When it initially sews and it ties in, it'll do a lock stitch to keep it from the thread from coming out of the needle. And then at the end, it's going to add another lock stitch, which is going to be around the trim. As setting here, we can set it as always, but it's going to add that second lock stitch so that after it cuts the thread, if you run your finger across it, it's not going to come undone. So lock stitches are something that's really important. We'll be going more into that later. Over here, we have our pull compensation, which is going to be, we can either do absolute, none, or percentage. So a percentage is a percentage of the width. We have absolute, which is a physical measurement that I'm going to give it, or we have none. Those are the options there. And then here is our underlay options. So we can just check these boxes, and it's going to give it underlay based off of what I select. Okay, and that's going to be this top bar going forward. Now we're going to talk about this here. So here we have our segment filter. Okay, we can set a filter. We can say what we want that to be, and we can show different things. So if I set my filter to 1 and I say show and I hit OK, it's going to try and do the segment filter properties. So now it's going to ask me what I want those properties to be. Again, we'll go into more in depth. We'll hit cancel there and cancel there, and that's going to be what that is. Now this is going to be hide selected segments. So let's go ahead and select the text here. We can hide it. We can show it. And if I just select the 1, then we can say hide unselected. So we can hide that one, and then we can show it as well. This is going to be our commands, and I'm going to turn back on 3D. This is what shows the 3D view, and I'm going to change the trim to always trim, and now we have our little scissors there. So the command is the little scissors. So that's going to show whether or not we can see the machine commands. And of course I want them to be there, so I'm going to show them because that tells me that I have a trim there. Next up is going to be show dots. Now this is one that is going to be, you're going to see it more when we zoom in. The dots are actually where the needle penetrations are going to go. So these dots here, like travel stitches, they're the machine's indicating that it's traveling through there. But then these dots that are at the edge of all the stitches right there, those are the actual needle penetrations from where it's going to start the stitch to where it's going to move and where it's going to place the stitches. So that's what show dots is. Show beads, start beads, stop beads, angle beads, corner beads, letter beads. So that's when you're going into the node edit or the vertex select that we were in there. You can go in and you can tell it that you want to be able to see those things. Okay. Next up is, this is for sequins, which we don't have. This is going to be applique fabric. So if we had an applique shape here, then we would be able to select the applique fabric and have that show. And that's where we can do that. Okay. After that, we've got our show active group. So I have this one selected, so it shows it. If I select the blue and I hit show active group, it's going to show the active group, which I'm surprised that it's not showing, hiding the red, but there we go. So it's going to show us the active group there by utilizing that button. And I will go ahead and turn that off. We have our grid, so you can see our grid lines went away. Grid lines are useful when you're digitizing, but if you're trying to capture an image, they're not necessarily that easy to have. We also have snap to. So this is if we want to snap to artwork, we can snap to the guidelines. This is when we are digitizing. So if I tell it I want to snap to grid and I come in here and I go across, I can snap it across the grid and then I can hit enter. And again, I can do that and hit OK. And now we're snapped to the grid. I can do that with those. I can force horizontal, force vertical. So that's just another tool we have to help digitize straight. Here we're going to show stitch exceptions. This is likely going to be our travel stitches or any exceptions that we put in there. It'll hide and show them. We can view by color, so we can say we want to see all of the red, we can see all, we want to see all the blue. We can do that here by view by color. Okay. Next up, we have our slow redraw ribbon. If I click on the slow redraw ribbon, you'll see down here that it puts this little ribbon. This is so that we can watch our simulated stitch objects sew. We can go through and we can actually see the order that it'll sew. And make sure that the things are pathed the way that we want them to be and that it's going to run smooth. So that's the show redraw ribbon, and I can show and hide that. We have our 3D stitches here, so that's going to allow us to see it. This is moving forward and backward through the design by 1 unit, segment, or stitch. So I can move it, forward or backwards 1, 10, 100, 1,000. I can move by command. I can move by color, and then I can move to end if I wanted to. So if I grab that and I go move to end, we can move that to, I don't know why I didn't move it to the end. Let's move that one to the end, and we'll figure that button out a little more later. And then range selects. So this is if we're actually selecting stitches. We can select a range of stitches, and we'll go into all this stuff a little bit later. And then convert. We can convert the outline to stitch segments. So if we had a vector object, we could convert the vector outline to stitch segments, or we can convert the text to a stitch segment. So I went ahead and hit the convert button, and now you can see that each letter is now individual, and it's no longer treating it like a line of text as far as keyboard editable, but it is treating it as each individual object that you can then go in and edit. So that'll be helpful for some things that we'll talk about later. That is going through the buttons that we have up here, as well as the menu item that changed when we added this. We'll be going into more of this later, but these are the options that we're going to be dealing with for the most part. And so the next thing we're going to go through in the next video is I'm going to be going through some of the user settings. We talked about that and some of the customized tools, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about those things. Thank you guys for watching. Remember, you can like and subscribe to the Embroidery Nerd YouTube channel. We also have a Facebook group, the Embroidery Nerd group, as well as a Discord channel. You can find us all at links.embnerd.com.